Christina, can I? Hello, everyone. Hi, Amy. Welcome to the Ethical Humanist Society of the Triangle. Thank you for joining our meeting today. I'm Ratish Sen, the President of the Board of Trustees of the Ethical Humanist Society of the Triangle. The Ethical Humanist Society of the Triangle promotes the use of reason and science in the search for and commitment to living an ethical life that benefits all humanity. We believe that personal inquiry, responsibility, and accountability are the best basis for an ethical decision-making. Our weekly forums seek to broaden our understanding of ethics and human nature, and our congregational community encourages us to share diverse opinions, friendship, and camaraderie. We welcome everyone to join our journey. If those of you who are visiting, if you would like some more information about our society, please contact me or John or Chris or any one of our members, and we will provide some information to you or ask you for your emails and so forth. Okay. We are a community, and so we share time to we take time to share our joys and concerns. So, any joys, any concerns? Anyone? Yeah, please. That is absolutely wonderful. Anyone else? Yes. Do you want this? Yes, Chris, do you want a mic?
Laura Breed just texted that her joy is that Fred's mom turned 87 and they're having a birthday party for her today. So.
What, we are excluded?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, yes, yes, sure. Yeah.
I actually have a sad, one of my cats died on Thanksgiving, and he inspired the first book that I wrote, and so it's a big loss for me.
Sorry to hear that. Oh, yes. Yes, March.
We watched a movie called The Electrical Life of Louis Wayne. He was an artist and he painted cats, and it was very good. We enjoyed it. That was on Amazon.
What is it called? The
Electrical Life of Louis Wayne.
Okay.
W-A-I-N.
And The Electrical Life of Louis Wayne. He's a cat painter. Anyone? Okay, then we shall move on. Today's program is a talk by Jim Buie on cultural shocks and ethical dilemmas in Turkey and in UAE. And John, oh, sorry, opening, are you doing opening words? Okay, okay, sure. Yes. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. I have opening words in Fred's place. Let me just click this on here. Yes. Try again. Well, I'm not getting, there we go. That's fine. I'm good. All right. So for my opening words today, I had an old friend who I've mentioned multiple times here who lived in Canada and died this past summer. And he had written some books. One called Solitude that was published and is still in print and is actually quite good. He was a philosopher, but he wrote a couple self-published books. And the last one he wrote was in 2011, which was 10 years ago, when he was about 69 years old. And he calls it Essays from Autumn, Meditations on Later Philosophy. So he felt he was growing old and he was writing from the point of view of, he considered himself elderly at the time. But one of the sections of the book deals with spiritual explorations, he calls it. He was an atheist, but he believed that people still could have ecstatic experiences of various kinds. And he described one of those experiences, and I'm going to read his description of it because I think it gives a nice feel for the kind of person he was and for what it means to experience some degree of ecstasy just from nature. So I take my daily autumn saunter through a predominantly hardwood forest. I enter this morning after the rain, noting that every tip of every bud and branch elbow has a drop on it. I can collect these for my chest of treasures, as real to me as diamonds. I move on to the tractor path through the forest, and soon I come to 3 huge old maples, which I call the 3 kings of wisdom. I supplicate for some radiance of wisdom that great age must have bestowed upon them. The 3 maples focus on what must be Apollo's Daphne, now a great yellow birch reaching for her branched tips above the forest canopy to touch her lover. Perhaps sad, she turned herself into a tree to avoid Apollo's seduction, but she remains beautiful enough for a god. With a world of piety to her highness, I press on towards Wired Tree, a large birch with an old fence wire growing right through its middle. We exchange pleasantries, and I continue towards Charlie, a large maple with an off-shooting arm, which always reminds me of Charles Atlas flexing his bicep. I usually challenge him to get a life, and he often replies something like, "Practice what you preach." I do not stay to trade jives because this is supposed to be a health walk, and it has already been too slow. But at least it has exercised my imagination and filled me with joy, seeing all these old friends and swishing through brightly colored leaves. So that gives you a sense of what kind of person this was. That's it for my opening words. Yes, and I also have the introduction today. Okay, so I'd like to introduce Jim Buie, who will be speaking us today about cultural shock. Jim grew up in North Carolina and is a resident of Farrington Village, but spent several years living in the Middle East. And he's going to share with us some of his experiences while there. And I think we're all looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So Jim, without further ado, it's all yours. And this goes to,
Okay, yep. All right, okay. Okay, all right. And so I'm not using this one, or is it this?
The Bible there is for Zoom, the other one is for.
Okay, okay, all right. Okay, all right. So I'm going to talk about cultural shocks, and cultural shocks are things that you can have right here. You don't have to travel 10,000 miles to have culture shocks, but some of them are very funny, and some of them are just strange. And then you get used to it. And then when you come home, you have more culture shock because you've already gotten used to what things were like there, and now it's different here. So first of all, I'll just sum up my background and experience. I taught English for 2 years in Turkey, 2009 to 11. This was in central Anatolia. Kayseri was the name of the town, which was a described as a pretty conservative town near Cappadocia. So you can see it right there, right in the central part of it. And it was a long and deep history that was truly fascinating. And then after 2 years there, I taught journalism at an international school in Abu Dhabi for a year. And then I taught communications courses, media history, media law, storytelling, public relations, news writing, journalism, research, photography, whatever they throw at me. I had, they would like tell me, sometimes a few days before classes start, we need somebody to teach this class. Can you do it? And then so I'd have to really scramble to stay ahead of the students. And then I taught, when I came back in 2018 and taught media writing and issues in communication at Elon University. And then that was just an adjunct position. So then I was courageous enough or foolhardy enough to go into the Alamance County Public Schools and teach or attempt to teach social studies. And that was for 2019 to 20. That was probably the biggest culture shock of all. Anyway, the time abroad was very enriching family experiences. My wife and sons and I had basically had the run of Turkey. We could just hop a bus for, $5-10 and go anywhere in the country. And that's the way we would spend a lot of weekends. We lived about an hour from Cappadocia, which is this region that has fairy chimneys and a lot of caves. You can go hiking in the caves, exploring the caves, and these old ruins of when the Greeks lived there, and even back. They had the Greeks and the Turks had an agreement back in 1923 that all of the Christians, the Greeks, had to move to Greece if they were Greek Orthodox. So they had to move, and then the Muslims from Greece had to move to Turkey. So it was extraordinarily painful. But a lot of those Greek homes in Cappadocia are still there. And then in the summer, you see the Greeks come in by busloads, and then they hold Orthodox services, sometimes in caves and stuff. It's just fascinating. My wife taught ESL and loved it. And when I first got there, I was doing sort of communications consulting online, but the Turks said, "You're a native English speaker. You can't let your wife work and you be at home. We have to use you." So they just invited me to teach at the university, which was a block away, to adults, and then also at a series of private schools. Our son, they invited my son to go for free to this private school. And then we had tutors at the university for him. And then after that, he wasn't a great English language learner. So, he wasn't a great Turkish learner. So we wanted to get him into a English language school. So we moved to Abu Dhabi, and he went to the American Embassy School there, and he loved it. Just a great experience. Enormously diverse population, about 60 different nationalities represented. And my older son had worked as a sound engineer for cruise ships for about 8 years, went to about 100 countries. And then he said, well, maybe I'll settle in the UAE with you guys. So he came and joined the entertainment industry in Dubai, which was, he has a lot of strange and interesting experiences to talk about. That it was like kind of like working in the Wild West. Anyway, so then he was there, and then his girlfriend, he was Filipino who we'd met on the ship. He got her into Dubai, and they were married in Dubai and Manila. They were so they've been married twice to the same person, and the same year. And my grandson was born in Dubai in 2015. And we adopted 2 Saluki desert dogs in the UAE who've become my soulmates. They're here in Fearington. And the parks in the UAE were like the United Nations because you would find people from all over the world there, and you learn about what life was like in South Africa and in Egypt and India and Kenya and many countries in Europe, because the Emiratis, the native population was only 13% in the UAE. So everybody else was from somewhere else. So it was fascinating. But we really felt like global citizens, and we went to about 40 countries. We were well compensated in the UAE with great benefits, and surprisingly, there were vibrant religious communities in the UAE with a strong sense of tolerance. The UAE worked hard not to become as having a lot of sectarian violence like other places in the Middle East. They invited the Pope to come in and speak and to hold a rally. So they had a great sense of religious tolerance. So that was fascinating too. Let me show you the UAE, which you might say is it's right there in the center. You might say it's in a bad neighborhood, but because you've got Saudi Arabia, which is much stricter, right next door. Oman is actually in some ways more progressive country, right next door, with a much larger native population. The Omanis, of course, the Emiratis they like to say we're very rich. They're very proud of their oil wealth. Well, the Omanis are much more down to earth kinds of people. But you've got just across what we call the Persian Gulf, but what they call the Arabian Gulf. You've got Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, which is just 20 miles. We went sailing in the Strait of Hormuz and we're wondering if we might get captured by by the Iranians sometimes, and some of my students actually did. Had kind of bad experiences with that. We did not, fortunately. But anyway, but from UAE was kind of a hub of Asia, and for $200 you could fly to Europe, $200 to Africa, $200 to just about anywhere in Asia, and we took full advantage of that because we had generous vacation. So we, as I mentioned, we went to like 40 countries. So that part was just fantastic. I arrived in the Middle East at a time of great hope and optimism, 2009. The US at that time was in the middle of the Great Recession, and so it was wonderful to discover parts of the world that weren't in Great Recession. And Turkey at the time was dramatically expanding and thriving economically. Its leadership at the time Recep Erdogan and Abdullah Gül were considered Muslim, but modernizers and democratizers at that time. American journalists were hired at universities in the UAE as nation builders to teach Western media practice and expand democratic participation. Turkey at the time sort of thought of itself as the great modernizer in the region. And the Arab Spring was initially viewed as a great democratic movement sparked by Barack Obama's election in 2008. You know, and it was kind of funny that my students in Turkey, they said, we really like Barack Obama. And I'd say, well, why is that? And they'd say, because he's a Muslim from Kenya. Yeah, and so that's kind of the way it was. Shortly after I arrived in the UAE, I had a kind of an experience of I'll give you a little anecdotes about offensive questions from both sides of the culture divide. Let's see here. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. So this was during a period of globalization, which I guess we're still in, but we're not sure where it's going. Globalization, it challenges stereotypes and creates culture shocks. When people are insulated and isolated in their own countries, they appear foolish when they encounter people from the world outside what they think of as normal. Shortly after I arrived in the UAE, a bank officer asked if I would like to apply for a credit card or loan. Well, perhaps, I said. I just have a few questions for you. He was new in the UAE. He was from India, and from a rural India, he said. He appeared a bit nervous and unsure. I see that you work at a university and are a teacher, he said. What's your caste? And I just I said, we don't have castes, and I don't know how to answer that question. He said, well, let me ask you a few questions. He says, most teachers are Brahmin, he said. Are you Brahmin? I don't know. I don't think so. And he says, we give Brahmins the best rates. And I said, I don't know. I don't have any idea. I said, well, then do you have any Dalits or untouchables in your family? And well, my sister's here, so, but I said, no, I don't think so. And he says, oh, well, that's good. That's good. You don't have any. And let's see. So that he scribbled a note in his file that I didn't have any Dalits or untouchables. And then he said, I just heard on the news that Americans like gay marriage and that 50% of Americans want to marry gay. Is that true? Could this possibly be true? How will Americans have children? No, it's not true. I said that Americans want to personally marry gays. I said about 10% of the population of any society is usually gay. So American Supreme Court had just voted to make it legal. So seeing my discomfort, he changed the subject. Do you have children? Yes, I have 2 sons. Well, only 2? Why so few? Are they obedient? And I said, will they work for you? And I said, no, they're not particularly obedient. And no, they will not work for me. They will choose their own jobs for themselves. Oh, okay. Now, what about your wife? Is she obedient? Not at all, I'm afraid. Would she want to use your credit card? Can't you discipline her by not giving her money? I said, well, she has her own job at a university. She can get her own credit card. Oh, 2 teachers married to each other. Then you really are Brahmin. Making another note in his ledger. I said, then he asked, who chose your wife? I did. I chose her, I said emphatically. What about your parents, your aunts and uncles? Didn't they have a say in whether you should marry her? No, they didn't really. I just started getting really impatient with this line of question for a simple credit card. But you will choose your son's wives, won't you? He said, based on their reputation and their family. I said, family customs are very different in the United States. Why do you Americans allow your wives to work outside the home? Why don't you insist that your wife cover her hair outside the home? Doesn't that make you feel unmanly and threatened that some other man might find her attractive and steal her? I began to get fed up with this line of questioning, and so I stood up to leave. And the man smiled and said he would order me a credit card with the best rate because you were Brahmin. So I thanked him and left rather brusquely, thinking to myself, what a backwoods fool, so ignorant of American cultural norms. But then I recalled the times I had asked culturally offensive questions when I first arrived in Turkey in 2009. I was obsessed with polygamy and honor killings, terrorism, and assuming some connection between the teachings of Islam and these things, which my adult students did not see whatsoever. They quickly set me straight while expressing sorrow over 9/11 in the US. One of the students noted that Americans, with their shamelessness over divorce and multiple marriages, seem to practice polygamy much more than Muslims. Honor killings at the time were estimated to be between 100 and 200 per year in rural Turkey. When I asked about that, one of my Turkish students retorted with a question about the crime rate and number of killings with guns in the US. Touché, I replied. The firearms, homicide, and suicide rates, as well as the overall crime rate, were much higher in the US than in Turkey or the UAE. I also remembered striking up a conversation with a middle-aged American at a restaurant in gourmet Cappadocia, Turkey. She had paid something like $1,200 to come to Turkey for a long weekend from the States. The Turks were amazed at such extravagant wealth. Having read that it is unsafe for a woman to travel alone in Turkey, she hired 2 male bodyguards or escorts as part of a package that included round-trip flights from Istanbul to Kayseri, hour-long taxi rides from Kayseri to Cappadocia, nights in a hotel in gourmet, an hour performance by whirling dervishes, and a few other introductions to Turkish culture. I overheard her asking naive questions of her hosts, revealing that she had not done the most basic kind of homework, such as, well, who was this guy Ataturk? Now, when was the Turkish Republic formed? I've heard that you Turkish men, you don't not like women who challenge or disagree with you. Is that true? And you like to beat your women. Is that true? How is a Turkish man supposed to respond to that? She did not get her money's worth. From our observation, it is not unsafe for a woman to travel alone in Turkey. The bodyguards were unnecessary. She could have booked a flight from Istanbul to Kayseri for $60, a bus from Kayseri to Cappadocia for $14, a night in a hotel in gourmet for $100 less, a performance by whirling dervishes for $40. In other words, she could have spent less than $500 or paid for a friend to accompany her from the States for much less than what she paid. So I just think this sort of idea of going to a foreign country and spending 5 days there is, well, I guess it's better than not doing it, but to think that you now know the country is not likely. Okay. So my view is if you can't spend at least a week in a country, don't bother to come because you just, unless your boss is paying the tab or something. That woman, that American, struck me as about as clueless as the backwoods Indian was to me. The moral of the lesson is when you meet a stranger from another country, don't ask the first offensive question that comes into your mind, and don't show off your ignorance of their country. Don't think throwing out money ensures quality or a safe experience. see. So I'm not going to go into that part of it. So keep your eyes and ears open. You can observe and experience culture shock anywhere, even in your own country, even moving 30 miles from one town to another, as I did in 2020. There's much more that I could say, but let's see. I'll just summarize some of these and we can open it up to questions. So we can take it where you want to take it. So when I first arrived in Turkey, I kind of felt like a space alien. I would walk into these schools and these elementary schools to teach English. And the first question that the students would ask was, "Are you Muslim?" And I said, "No." And, "Oh, what are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm Christian." And, "Oh," one of the fifth graders pulled me aside and they said, "Repeat after me." And it basically said, asked me to repeat that Muhammad was my prophet. And I sort of hesitated, and then it just says, "Oh, I'm so glad you did that, because if you didn't, you were going to burn in hell." And then, when I would go to the salon or just to get a haircut, I never knew what was going to come out. Because I couldn't really communicate very well with them. So after I'd go to the salon and I'd go back to class, the students would say things like, "Sir, did you paint your hair?" Or, they'd give me like this huge pompadour, just straight up. And then my wife would go to the salon, and she would come out looking like Mary Tyler Moore from the 1963, or Jackie Kennedy, or all she lacked was a pillbox hat or something. It was just, we felt kind of embarrassed every time we'd go to the salon and then go back to class, and the students would do double takes. "God, you look different," And then another thing that was really difficult was, to drive and to see how these people drive and how they disobey the traffic rules and they flout the law. And I could show you some video of this that'll actually give you anxiety just watching it. Another thing that was challenging to adjust to was the segregated lives for men and women. Not so much for expats nor foreign faculty, but how it was like America in the 1950s or maybe 1900, where the men would always be on one side of the social event, women would be on the other side. Women would be talking about their children and domestic things, and men would be talking about international events and sports and things like that. So you could see on the one hand that you would have very, very strong experiences with people of your own gender, but not so much from the other gender. In my observation, you had about the same experience, if not greater, of homosexual behavior as in the US, but it's not officially acknowledged nor discussed. So that I would have students, particularly in the UAE, who one of them, I had a colleague who was just really beautiful, and she went to teach, and she dressed very beautifully too. She went into a class, and the boys who were 21 years old, they were very much like adolescents, and they just could not even speak to her. And so she said, "Well, what's wrong?" And one of them said, we're not used to seeing a female so beautiful and uncovered. We get we're not used to it. And then one of the boys said, it doesn't bother me. And she looked at him. He said, it doesn't bother me because I'm gay. And one of the other boys said, you can't be gay. That's not allowed in our society. And he says, I'm gay until I get married. And then I would have, I had a student who came into my office, and she closed the door, and we're not supposed to do that. And she said, "Sir, I have something to tell you." I said, "What's that?" She says, half the girls at the university are gay. And I said, "Well, how do you know?" I caught him. And I said, "Well," "what? So what?" And she said, "Well, it's because," and this girl was very westernized. She said, "It's because dating isn't allowed here, so they take what they can get." So, just human. I mean, basically, it's in both countries. They were huge consumers of American entertainment, but many, I felt, resented the cultural imperialism of turning on their television set, and all you can find is American TV or American movies, but they're kind of addicted to it. Even in Saudi Arabia, I think, that where you can't get it on the public airways, but you can certainly download it, download movies and stuff. And so they're fascinated by that culture, but because it addresses a lot of things that are taboo in their own culture. So another thing I noticed was that Middle Eastern societies are far more group-oriented than here, where people are kind of hyper-individualistic. Conspiracy theories run rampant with very little pushback, and even my smartest students believed conspiracy theories. And so I would have to try to say, let's talk this through about, and so I would say, if you say you've got a deep secret, and if you tell one person this deep secret, you think they would keep it? And you say, yes. You tell two people the deep secret, do you think they'll keep it? No, maybe. 3 people, 4 people, no, I couldn't tell a deep secret to 4 people and expect it to be still private. And I said, well, okay, so you think there's this deep state that's doing all these secret things, but nobody knows about it. How is that? And something like the moon landing, which I argued with them about, they didn't believe happened. I said, how many people do you think it would take to perpetuate that conspiracy? Well, hundreds, thousands maybe. I said, well, how would they do that? And some of them thought, well, if they got enough money, maybe they didn't. I said, well, even so, you tell 1,000 people who are paid to pull off this massive conspiracy, they're going to brag to somebody, well, I got this much money. So maybe they began to think that conspiracy theories don't make a lot of sense usually. Children, adolescents, and young adults are much younger than in America. They're more protected, more innocent, more respectful of adults, much more overtly religious, but underneath they express some of the same kind of doubts that people do here. The public culture is that you have to be religious, but underneath, who knows? After the culture shocks, I saw some similarities. These societies are just at different stages of development than we are here. The lives of women are not so different from those of my grandmother and great aunts, probably. Both the US and the UAE were greatly influenced by the British Empire. One of the things I learned in my travels was, the British Empire essentially dominated about 1/3 of the world. You can see it everywhere. The series we watched while we were there, this series Downton Abbey, which could have been made about the Gulf Arabs who've inherited enormous wealth, but if there's a post-oil future, their lifestyles seem endangered. So you can sort of see they're sort of at the place where the Downton Abbey characters were 100 years ago. The movie The Help, which we played to our students, and then had some of them read the book. And it was extraordinarily eye-opening to them because most of them had maids and help from Asia, to whom they dehumanized to some extent. And so that movie, I think, helped many of them understand. I remember one student wrote a very moving piece about interviewing her help and learning things from her point of view and becoming an advocate for that person. So that's one way in which American culture, had a positive impact, at least in that one particular case. I found that bigotry and racism are commonplace around the world. We think that, we're uniquely racist, and we most definitely are not. I basically heard a lot of, almost every country that we went to, that you would hear racist, bigoted comments about, like the Turks would make those statements about the Greeks would make them about the Turks, the Emiratis would make them about the, of course, the Jews, and then they, after I left, they basically recognized, UAE recognized Israel, and so it's probably some interesting cultural exchange going on there. So I would say that in the countries that I visited, there are far fewer social taboos to express racism or tribalism than in the US. We call it sort of political correctness, that you're not allowed to say certain things. Well, they just say them out loud. And I had a student who said, here she was, dark skinned, but a light dark skin, and there were lots of dark skinned people in the class. She said, well, the lighter skinned person is smarter, and we're the founders of the UAE. And I challenged that, but it was interesting that the darker skinned people they didn't speak up. They just acted like, well, we've heard this so many times before, and maybe they even believed it themselves. So I did this whole group of classes on racism and overgeneralizations, and maybe it made a difference. I like to think so. At least in the United States, we can address issues like police brutality and racial injustice and poverty and discrimination, talk about it. In many countries, protests are not allowed. Okay. Was much more than I could say. Essentially, I would say that I left feeling much more pessimistic. I was a cockeyed optimist when I arrived there in 2009. And by the time I left in late 2017, I had a probably more realistic view, if not cynical view, of that region of the world. And I was wrong the first time. Maybe I'm wrong this time. So I hope so. I mean, I could go on and talk specifically about sort of the future of the future of Turkey and the future of the UAE, but I won't go into that. I do think I will outline a few ethical dilemmas that we in nation building is an ethical dilemma. Is that a good thing or bad thing? I did it, and I can see both sides of it. Modernization, is that a good thing or bad thing? We were part of that, and is that a good thing, bad thing? Cultural imperialism, good or bad? I don't know. A sense of collaboration with oppressors, and if you stay in a country long enough, you're going to be put in that position. All right, casting a blind eye to unprofessional, abusive, illegal behavior and corruption, or choosing to participate in it. Unregulated international social media, which is unaware of local cultural norms that can spark violent conflict. Should there be regulation of social media? I taught John Milton's idea, of the marketplace of ideas, but in the contemporary world, it seems to be very quaint. That his idea was that if truth and falsehood compete in a unfettered marketplace of ideas, truth will always win in the end. I'm not so sure about that. I saw disturbing trends, crackdowns on free speech, basic human rights, jailing of dissidents, domestic and international terrorism, surveillance societies, greatly enhanced and enabled by new technologies, which are also happening here, increasing self-censorship, which is also happening here, dysfunction and loss of democracy, also happening here. The constant crisis of climate change makes authoritarian responses more tempting, and loss of freedoms, this may be something that's just happening all over the world. So anyway, we can continue the conversation online, which I have a lot of my stuff written there. It's on a Substack account, jimbuiesubstack.com, my email, and I hope to do some podcasts in 2022. Anyway, I'll just open up to questions. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Going to the question and answer session.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to come around with the mic, and I also have this one so that you can speak into this microphone so that people online can hear. So, all right, we'll start with Linda.
Were you teaching in English?
I was, yes.
You were, and the students spoke English?
They did.
And did you learn?
They had some level in English. I mean, I taught beginning English to elementary students. So they would be, but they were like fourth graders, but they had more English than we would have of any language probably.
And did you learn any Turkish?
I learned enough to get by. Yeah.
Yes. I have a quick question. This
Yeah.
bank official,
Yeah.
which bank was it?
I didn't use that bank too much after that.
Did you report this man? Because I cannot see that what he asked you was permissible anywhere.
No, I know. Yeah,
I would have reported.
Yeah, I probably should have. I mean, I was new to the country. I didn't know what was, yeah.
Or slapped him at least.
Yeah.
Hi, well, so we have some parallels because I left during the recession and I went to live in Israel
Okay, yeah.
and I got a job there in a medical center and I was there when the flotilla happened. So I'm interested to know what the reaction was in Turkey. That also affected me because I would have loved to visit Turkey, but then at that point they advised against any travel to Turkey
Right.
for.
Well, I was right in the middle of the flotilla controversy because I had not a student that I had taught, but a student at one of the schools that I taught at was on the flotilla and was killed. And his name was Furkan Duan. And so I did a radio piece for that because I attended his funeral and so there, and Kayseri was really very sympathetic to, and some of the people that were on the flotilla back, I interviewed them. So it was a very disturbing time. It's very disturbing for me too, because I considered myself a supporter of Israel, and I just thought that was begin to see things in a more complex way after that. Yeah.
My wife and I went to Turkey a few years back. I forget exactly when it was, but our trip was with Rick Steves, who
Yes,
yeah,
I know, yeah.
It was a nice way to learn about the culture without having studied a whole lot beforehand. Because
Right.
when you're going from one place to another on the bus, the guide will talk to you about where you're going or give you some history, that kind of thing. So that and one of the things we did that was really fun was to have a lunch. One of the residents of the smaller towns gave us lunch, and so we were able to eat what she did and talk to her. But of course, Turkey was an incredible place, and I learned Istanbul is just an amazing place to go to. To see the history. So it was really a positive experience, and that was before it started going on what I call its current decline, which is the Erdogan becoming more and more authoritarian.
Right,
And,
exactly. Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
We visited Jim and Lisha in Abu Dhabi, and I was struck then by what you said. Money that came into the country. It was like what, from the 60s to the
That's right.
about 40 years.
Yeah.
Could you say a little something?
Yeah. The UAE actually this weekend is celebrating its 50th anniversary. So my students would think, it was founded in 1971. My students would think, back in ancient times before 1971, the world really didn't exist much, because these students were born after that. They don't, well, if it didn't happen in my lifetime, it really isn't important. That's usually it too. But anyway, what's fascinating was because basically there was a tribal leader by the name of Shakput, who was head of what was then Abu Dhabi. And they had discovered oil in the 1950s. Well, Shakput did not trust banks or the modern world. So when British Petroleum came and said, we've discovered oil, and he said, well, I don't want my money going into the bank. They said, well, what do you want to do with it? And he said, I want you to bring it to me. I will store it in the back room. So they would bring, every 3 months, they would bring truckloads of millions of dollars and put it in a room in the mansion, cash in the mansion. And then somehow a rat got in there and ate $10 million of the money. So after that, people around the country said, we can't allow this to happen anymore. He's a miser. He's a miser. We can't allow it. So his younger brother, they brought him up. His name was Zayed, and he had a much more enlightened outlook in life. And so the mother had said, boys, you must never have a fight. And so Zayed went to his brother and he put his arm around him and said, he said, Shakput, would you like to take a little trip? And Shakput, no. Well, we want to, there's so much of the world for you to see. Please, come take this trip. So first time they had a big boat off the shore ready to take Shakput on this trip in which he would not return. But he wouldn't go. So somehow finally they persuaded him to go on the boat. And then Zayed became the ruler. This is in the 1960s, and Zayed was a very visionary ruler. And he had this vision of what the UAE could be. And so at that time, people were basically barefoot, living in tents in the sand. There's documentaries on this. It's fascinating. And he envisioned making it into a extraordinarily modern 21st century society. And that's really what has happened since really the 80s. It has become, they've leapt centuries since then. And when you go there, you have to be amazed at the progress that they've made in that period of time. But even so, there are still some 7th, 8th century attitudes out in the hinterlands. But hopefully the people can be, because they can be given material wealth. I mean, the social benefits are such that the people who have a more backwards point of view have been bought off essentially. But there's still tension about that. whether modernization is a good thing. And then my students' parents would talk about how we were better people in the old days when we depended on each other, when we didn't have such big houses, when we didn't have such technology, we were better people. But the march of modernization is such that that's sort of the social contract that we're going to make things, we're going to make you wealthier and better, and you're going to have more material wealth. And so I don't know what's going to happen in the long run if they'll ever reject that.
Oh, so in thinking, thank you so much. It was really wonderful conversation. In thinking of the parallels that you've drawn, you talked a little bit about some, but any parallels between your experience in Turkey and Alamance County that you share specifically?
Well, notice what the mic is on, but I would say that the tribalism and the feuding in Alamance County, in the Middle East. And some of my students actually in the UAE, the schools were very well resourced, whereas in Alamance County, a lot of them aren't. And so one of our colleagues at the American School in Abu Dhabi said that he loved teaching at the embassy school compared to teaching in an American school. He said, because the students' needs are met. And so therefore, you don't have to be a behavior manager or a social worker all the time. You're there and you teach the material. Whereas in a lot of places in the US, a teacher is basically a behavior manager and a social worker.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Since you stayed in Turkey during the time when Erdogan was being considered as a democratizer, after decades of military rule.
Right, yeah.
So what changed? Why is he now considered somebody who's trying to reestablish the old caliphate?
Well, I think that he sort of let the power go to his head. So that's, and also, Turkey has this, two sides of the same coin, because when he was considered a modernizer, it was because it was believed that we cannot have military intervention in politics anymore. And so that, and I thought, well, that's good. They're becoming a mature democracy. They're not going to allow military intervention anymore. And then he became very, they basically repressed the military, but there was this movement, the Gulen movement, that, I don't know the extent that they were really responsible for the coup attempt in 2016, but they were blamed for it. And so in the school that I worked at, which was a Gulen school, it basically was shut down. My former colleagues, a number of them are in prison, and 100,000 people were basically fired. Basically, it was a political movement. He felt it was a threat to him, and they have some evidence that the Gulen movement was a threat, but I can't get into the extent that it really was. And so you have now in Turkey, you have the highest educated prison population in the world, because you've got tens of thousands of educators who are in prison.
Yeah, I don't think that has happened since the Chinese Cultural Revolution.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it's very similar to. Yeah.
Any other question? Anyone else? Yes.
You were teaching the wealthiest there.
Right.
What exposure did you have to those who were not as fortunate, or is everybody rich there?
Well, in the UAE, of course, essentially you have indentured servitude because from other parts of the world. But the people who come there, they come from places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and many of them, actually, it worked for them because, I mean, we had a lifeguard at our pool, and he saved enough money in 2 years to build a house in Sri Lanka, you know? So that dream does work for some. You know, I saw a poll that said of all the expats in the UAE, what percentage of them are happy or feel that life is, the life here is rewarding? Said, and the PR firm said, well, 60% think it's wonderful. Well, that means 40% don't. Yes. So, yeah.
Hi, my question is about the status of women in UAE.
Yeah.
As we have seen in Afghanistan,
Right.
the rights of women can evaporate
Yes.
overnight, essentially.
Right. Yes.
And so what freedoms and rights do women in UAE enjoy?
Okay.
As some are being educated.
They basically have free college education and free, and you know, if you're truly a scholar, they'll pay for you to go abroad, or free graduate education. And in my observation, I taught at it was a co-ed university, but there was a locked door between the male side and the female side, so they only got together like once or twice a year for the film festival. Essentially, that's when they acted like what I would consider an American university, when they had a film festival. The rest of the time, and the girls were much better students than the boys. The boys had what I would say was a sense of entitlement that they had, you know, because of their connections, they knew what their jobs were going to be after graduation. And the girls saw education as a way out of the cloistered life. I don't have to be, you know, under the thumb of my father or my older brother if I get an education and I have a job in the workplace. I had a student who went on to become a correspondent for CNN and did a wonderful job. And but her family really objected to her having that position. So after a couple of years, she went to work for a PR firm that had better hours, or, you know, and so it was sort of sad for us as her teachers, because we thought, you know, she was going to go really big places. And you do have those kinds of women in the UAE, and the UAE does a lot of international public relations about how they really want to create a society where women are equal. But I think underneath there's still a lot of struggle. I mean, and I think the leadership believes in that, but even if the leadership of the country believes in it, and many of them were educated in the West, you still have the people in the other Emirates who are, you know, back centuries in the past. So if you go too far, too fast, these people are going to revolt. So you have to. There's actually a TV series about a woman lawyer in the UAE that I thought it's on Netflix. I think I don't remember the name of it, but it's very interesting. Yeah.
I wanted to know if you could elaborate on the previous question. You were asked about indentured servitude, and you spoke about a lifeguard. But my understanding of indentured servitude is that they are paying off a debt, and sometimes it's structured so they never actually become free of that debt.
Right.
Whereas a lifeguard would have been hired as a skilled professional. and doesn't come there to pay off a debt.
Right, yeah.
So if you could talk more about the indentured servitude aspect.
Well, it depends on how you're recruited, and who recruits you, and whether the recruits have it, and whether the recruits have any ethics or not. CNN has been doing a series on slavery worldwide, and I actually had a student who wrote a piece on that, and we posted it on the student website, and it disappeared sometime later. So it's a sensitive topic. So that, I mean, I know there are a lot of horror stories about abused laborers and abused housemaids. And we worked, our church did we had a volunteer group that went to the Filipino embassy and provided, basic toiletries and some food and stuff, because the embassy was just packed with women who'd run away from their employer. And of course, that's illegal to do that. Your employer is your sponsor, your work sponsor. So if you disobeyed your work sponsor, then you've committed a crime. So anyway, we helped them out what we could, and then, but after a while, the church was discouraged from doing. There were surveillance cameras going around the embassy, and we got the sense that we better not, help these people out too much. Or, yeah. So there's a whole lot that can be said about surveillance societies, and I don't want to pick on Turkey or the UAE, because I think that's happening worldwide essentially, people are losing their sense of privacy, and so when I tell people some things that happened in the UAE, they say, "Well, what did you expect? You're going to going to the Middle East. What did you expect?" But if you say, "Well, these things happen here too," then you say, "Well, okay, it's not just them. Maybe it's us too." Yeah, sure. Okay, all right. Well, I can talk more about that. Essentially, they're in a terrible situation now. They've got hyperinflation. They have high unemployment. Word is that Erdogan is at his lowest point in popularity, and the elections are scheduled for 2023. The opposition, which has been very fractured. There was an article I read in the Financial Times that said that they are now united in their opposition to him, but will he allow or accept an election result? He claimed fraud when the opposition won the mayor's race in Istanbul, and he said it was fraudulent and has to have a do-over. Well, they did a do-over in 2020. The opposition won landslide. So that can happen in certain places. And so he's in there till 2023, probably, unless they're able to call an election sooner. They have about, they've had a series of crises. They had huge millions of refugees coming in from Syria and Iraq, Lebanon, which is, the Turks are very hospitable, but and very open people by nature, but they've really just been overwhelmed with all the refugees coming in. and they have, let's see, what else is, 10 years ago, they thought that they were going to sort of, recreate the Ottoman Empire. I don't think that they think that anymore. They're just basically below water. And so, I think it's a terrible, the lira, the Turkish lira was 25 cents to the dollar when we were there, and I think it's dropped by 10 to 15 cents. So it's terrible inflation, and their money's not worth anything. So it's a real crisis, and I don't know whether they're going to have unrest or what's going to happen.
I was going to add, they're also in trouble with NATO as well as the Organization of Islamic Countries.
Right.
So they have United States putting sanctions on them,
Right.
as well as Saudi Arabia.
Right. Yeah.
Any others? Thank you.
Sure thing. Yes. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
And then I'm going to hand it to
Okay. All right. Okay. I can talk to anybody individually if you have an individual question.
It's a Zoom meeting, and we have the board meeting.
I know. Slips my mind. I don't have it.
All right.
We do have scheduled speaking.
But it's on Zoom.
Yes.
I have not heard anything about our. Something that. The first time here, so I really don't know.
Oh, another announcement is that, as you know, that our election for members of the board coming up in January, and a number of positions are coming open. We will post that soon. So if you're interested, you can throw your hat in the ring. No good thing to go that punish. All right.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Okay. So my closing words. Hearing aids get caught in the mask occasionally. There we are. So I'd like to read another little piece from this book by my old friend. He comments in the book that one of his favorite songs was the song from the Fantastics, Deep in December. I won't sing it, but the lyric says I won't read all the lyrics either, but try to remember the kind of September when life was slow and oh so mellow. And you remember the song. But he decided as he had aged that most of what that song says is totally wrong. And that he wrote his own take on it, which I'm going to read you now. There never was a time in my September I was slow and oh so mellow. Now deep in December, outside my window, across frozen field, grass is showing green through the yellow stubble. I remember very little since my stroke, and in the rubble there is little to follow. Besides, since the fanaticism of the 1900s, following is not well thought of. Now feeling deep in December, dreams may lie next to my pillow, but on my pillow, sleepless hours wonder about them. Yes, I can remember how often love glowed like an ember about to billow, but instead suddenly winked out and extinguished forever until early December. When finally it billowed and moved its pillow next to mine, more welcome because of the loneliness since September. Now I know, though the snow will follow, that the heart is not hollow. Anyway, I thought that was a nice take. So, thank you.
Well, our program has come to an end, but the fellowship continues. So please join us next Sunday on Zoom for the program, and then we'll have a board meeting following the program. Not today. All right. Thank you all.
and